Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm speaking today with actually someone from an organization I've spoken with this year from the Center for Poverty Analysis, Nilakshi de Silva. You're a researcher there. And it's, I think, a topical, in the sense, it's a topic that never goes out of fashion, development. I mean, there's so much talked about it. And CEPA, for me, is one of the most innovative thinkers in terms of the civil society organizations working on it. You've embraced new media. You're coming up with innovative new publications. You're going in through languages outside of English as well. And so in that respect, I think CEPA is a wonderful institution for new thinking. And it's on those lines that actually we're going to talk about today, Nilakshi. This seminar that you're going to have later on in a couple of weeks from the time you're speaking, looking at development in Sri Lanka. I've read the concept note, but what for you is the raison d'etre of having this? This is an annual thing that CEPA is doing. But clearly, I mean, even though you speak about it annually, there's still more scope to be talked about in terms of the development. Why is it still such a relevant topic?
Well, actually, this year the symposium is quite different because we are, as you said, the Center for Poverty Analysis, and the annual symposiums before this were focusing very much on issues, on an issue based, so like an issue of poverty, so
and you've
child
been having
poverty.
it for how many years now?
Now 10 years.
10 years. So this is the 10th year?
No, this is actually now the 11th.
11th year, okay.
So we've been focusing very much on the poor and issues of the poor. But what we've been finding, and this is a bit of a long-term issue that has been coming up, is that the issues of poverty are not really the issues of the poor. Poverty is structurally, there is a structural issues that create poverty and perpetuate poverty. And unless you step back and look at the whole of the issue, the development aspect, you can't really find lasting solutions or rationales and issues about what is really behind this issue of poverty. Otherwise, it is just putting plasters on symptoms, really.
Pardon me for asking, what has CEPA been doing for 10 years if it hasn't been looking at this in this way?
Actually, because we were the Center for Poverty Analysis and we were very much thinking about poverty in terms of what are the needs of the poor, what are the issues of the poor. So it is actually a reflection also of the way our thinking has also changed, because one of the things that we find is that when we go to the field and you talk to people, and we do a lot of primary data collection, what you find is that the kind of development that is being delivered to them and their expectations, visions, values of what they think of a good life, there is some kind of a disjunct. To give you an example, you would know we did this monitoring of the resettlement under the Southern Highway project. And what we find is that when we went to the field, actually the very first time we went to the field to pilot the questionnaire, we went to Kalutara, and the first household that we interviewed, they had a house by the river, a beautiful location. And they had actually already vacated the house. They had moved somewhere else. But that day they had come back to the previous location because they didn't like bathing inside a toilet. You know, they didn't. In the new house, they were bathing inside a toilet. They didn't like that. They had come back to the old house to bathe in the river. You know, these are the things that were important to them. And this, I mean, that came up in the first pilot. And this idea resonated through the entire field data collection. What people were really upset about when they had to move, because the compensation was actually quite reasonable for that project.
Though it varied, right?
It varied, but it was, I mean, much more reasonable than what is paid on a lot of other projects. But people really felt the loss of the green environment that they had, not their land necessarily, but you know, the common spaces, the neighbors' land, the green environment that they lost. They really felt it. And there were so many other projects like that, where you go to the field and there is another project we did in Ratnapura, which was to provide roads for people into very interior villages. And the idea was that when you provide roads, so that will create economic prosperity, because people will be able to do more with their time. And what really happened was that they used the time that was saved from having the roads for leisure, because they really valued that. I mean, we think that just because people are poor and vulnerable, that they don't value those things.
And then engage in economic activity 24/7.
So with this idea that material economic prosperity is the only thing that is important, and there is a disjunct with that idea.
You know, I can't but help think that you're right, you know, kind of trying to ride a rising wave of what actually you pointed out in your concept note as well, a discourse, and I quote, dominated by the search for economic growth post-war. Everything is pegged to GDP growth, whether it's 6 or 7 or 8%. Is there anybody, I mean, in the concept note, you also try to address policymakers. But my question is there anybody listening? Or is it all being captured by one party's idea of development, particularly after 2009?
I think we might also overestimate the role of policymakers in this, because I think we underestimate the role of civil society. I think you and I, as well as, you know, civil society, right, all of us, we are part of this country, and we should really have a dialogue about what is the development we want, and that is lacking in this country. And then if that is lacking, you can't really just point your finger and say so and so has his vision of development and that is what we are seeing, because the alternatives, that discussion is not happening, which is why I think it's also, I mean, these are thinking outside the box, thinking against the grain is not something that is easy. I mean, even for us, because we are coming from our backgrounds, the things we have learned, especially now I have learned development, so I was taught a certain kind of development. To think outside of that is not easy. It's not easy, and that is the vision that is fed to you from every angle. And to think outside of that, to stop and step back and say, even to think it is necessary to step back is quite a big challenge.
You know, I grant you that. I grant you that. But if it weren't, for example, and I'm using CEPA, for the pilot studies that you've done, for the discussions that you've initiated, as you say, in the field, do you see any kind of those discussions occurring without CEPA's input? Do you see an endogenous debate and discussion happening at, for want of a better term, at the grassroots, though I'm not trying to homogenize the grassroots, but at the field level, without the influence, support of, say, Colombo-based institutions like CEPA? And if not, why not? My point is this, that whenever I get a guest here, he or she always says that this discussion and debate is not occurring, and then goes on to flag examples of how and when it has occurred, always with the with that person or that institution spearheading that debate. My question is, to go back to the earlier one, why isn't it happening in any case? Why aren't people at the village level talking about, or are they? I don't know. Is it not being reported?
Yes, I think it's a mistake to think that kind of discussion is not happening. I think it is not happening at levels that we see easily. The symposium that we are trying to have is a dialogue that we are trying to have at a different level. The conversations are happening, I think, at many different levels. Even in a Colombo-based environment, we are not the first to start talking about it. There are people who are thinking this, living this, grappling with this idea on a regular basis. For example, Dr. Ariyaratne, Sarvodaya movement is a fairly radical rethinking of what development is about, and he started that so many years ago. In the same way, these ideas are not really coming entirely from within us, because we see a disjunct with what is happening in the field. So those ideas are there in the field. I mean, we did a study a couple of years ago in Badulla. It was called Multidimensional Poverty, trying to understand what dimensions people consider important for well-being. And there it was really interesting, because when we were talking about things like relationships and subjective well-being and things like that, those people already had ideas about how, what brings meaning to their life. And we were thinking, it's not just economics and it's all of this, and you need to have these basic necessities. That idea is already there. It's not as if we bring that idea. People are very well aware. It depends on how exposed you are to the kind of thinking that is happening in the mainstream, but people are very well aware of what is important in their lives. And it is not just material comforts. Of course, those are important. But every day people are making choices that show that other things are more important to them. I mean, a big issue in Sri Lanka is the fact that why aren't more women in the labor force, and policymakers are tearing their hair out saying, why aren't educated women working? But those are choices that women make about what is important in their life. They choose to be a caregiver because those are important. I mean, just the other day we were talking to somebody who was saying, for the economy, it's better if the woman goes out, earns money, and hires somebody else to look after your children. But I mean, it's not about the economy, no? It's about the people and about the choices that they make. And if a woman says, I prefer to stay home and look after, for a certain period of time or whatever, those are the choices. I mean, that's because we think of development as something separate to the people. We think of the health of the economy as a good in itself. Right? I mean, so many years ago, Schumacher said, economics as if people mattered. And that is what you need. Development is not about the economy or the GDP or your trade balances.
And that's a good segue into my next question. I mean, I can see on the one hand the great value of having these debates and discussions at all levels of society and polity across the country, not just English as well, and in a variety of media and formats. A government has to make hard decisions, bad decisions, possibly the least bad of a smorgasbord of even worse decisions in terms of macroeconomic policy. So there's never easy way out. Where do you think the country's foci should be in terms of the development agenda as we move forward? 2015, the MDGs, what happens after that? I don't have a peg on our GDP growth, but I think aspirationally we are looking at 8% aspirationally. It'd probably be all 6.7, I'm told, this year. What should be the macroeconomic foci? I'll come back to the meso and micro later on in relation to the seminar as well. But what's most important in your mind?
Well, the thing that is really a little bit of a concern, well, actually not a little bit, quite a bit of concern to us is that in Sri Lanka, growth is happening and changes are happening. Economic growth is happening, change is happening. But what is underlying that is that the inequalities in society are starting to emerge much more. And in 10 years since the 80s and now, our Gini coefficient has increased from like 35 to like 49, right? Which is quite a substantial change.
Now, for the non-economists, what does that mean?
That means that actually the income is the income that is going to the top part of the distribution of households is getting bigger and bigger, smaller and smaller. So actually, in an easy way to understand is that about I think about more than 70% of the national income is going to the top 40%, right? So
there's a growing disparity.
Yeah, it's a growing disparity. It's not a static, and we used to be a much more equitable society. So and then the other issue is also that the social mobility that has been happening in this country is coming very much from our social protection system. So the universal education is a hugely important factor in social mobility. You can find in Sri Lanka, which you don't find in a lot of other countries, is that in one generation people come out of poverty because they have been educated. I mean, there are enough cases where there's a wage earning household, next generation they're doctors, right? There are enough cases. It only happens because we provide a quality education through the free education system. Then the healthcare system, similar issues. Those are breaking down. Those are breaking down. And now actually, even whatever your income level, you have to spend, whether you are sending your child to a national school or otherwise. Now there is increasingly more money. To get the child into
school, you have to
yes, exactly. And then, classes from grade 1, 2, people are sending them for classes. So what is happening is that increasingly what is provided in this, what is available and accessible, opportunities that are available, is determined on the basis of how much you can pay. That is a dangerous trend. Because money should not be the only determining factor. We should all have certain opportunities. Equality of opportunity, equality of outcome is not necessary, but equality of opportunity is very, very important. It's a question of the kind of society you want to live in. Right? I think it's not really about when you ask people about development in Sri Lanka, people talk about shiny new buildings, high rises, roads,
highways,
highways. I'm not saying those things are not important, but I think that is a red herring. Those are not the key factors.
On that score, I mean, there's a friend of mine who shall remain unnamed, who has a very interesting blog called The Curionomist, The Curious Economist. I'm sure you know who this person is. And recently, this person blogged about a symposium, the 2012 annual sessions of the top body of Sri Lanka's economists, and these economists had made a number of points, of which this person has distilled 9 points. And one point actually resonated with what you just said. Sri Lanka's spending on R&D, on research and development, is around 0.11%. And in comparison with a middle-income country like Malaysia, which is about 0.6%, I've asked this question before. Is there a concern for you that we are not investing in research and development for endogenous innovation?
I think there is a certain amount of investment, but I think the bigger question is that we are not finding the resources and the time to reflect. I think that is really important, and I think creativity comes from having that time. No, when you're rushing around doing things, there is really no time to be creative. And I think we are now so focused on this, economic development, and not just at a country level, at individual household level. We are all so driven to excel beyond and have a lot more than what we actually need. I think what is really happening is that the space for creative thinking is probably shrinking, and I don't think that is necessarily an issue for Sri Lanka. I think that might be a global phenomenon. And even in schools, there is less time to really absorb what you are learning, but more focus on exams and the quantum of things that you need to study.
Nilakshi, with respect, in schools, I don't think they teach critical thinking at all. So I think that's going to be a problem. But that's actually something that I found very interesting with the symposium you have planned, because it is actually expanding beyond the usual suspects. You are bringing in the media, you are bringing in the arts. How important is that for you to see development, to question, critique development in a broader scope, in a broader frame?
I think one of the big problems in development is that it has become the domain of a few people, economists, especially economists and development professionals, and nobody else is considered to have knowledge or information that is important to talk about development. But development is for all of us, and all of our values and all of what we envision need to be in there. And I think one of the fundamental ideas driving the development, this particular symposium, is that we should have this conversation with a bigger group, because inside our little groupings, we really have no new ideas.
And so what, for example, by bringing in art, and you want to bring in some film, you want to show some film, are you saying that you might find in these domains better ideas for Sri Lanka's development?
Yes, I think there is value in questioning these things and talking among ourselves about whether the development that we are delivering and the development that we think of in ourselves for one thing, and our visions, whether those are matching.
Gelling. Okay.
And there are so many other people outside of Sri Lanka who are thinking about these things, and also in Sri Lanka. So what we were thinking was that if you bring these people together, that we might have a creative discussion. I don't know whether it will really lead to the solution. I don't think it will provide solutions that are simple, but I think the conversation
is itself important.
Is important.
It's strange, and maybe I just missed it when I speed read the concept note. And also I asked this because I asked this of the earlier guest from CEPA as well. CEPA is so good with tech, with new media in particular. The baseline is quite poor, so I'm not saying that you're good because there's nobody else doing what you're doing. You're genuinely innovative. What I didn't see was, and I want to ask this not because it's not a technocratic perspective. I'm not suggesting that technology necessarily helps, but because you have been doing stuff with technology, with multimedia in particular, with the web, with mobiles, do you feel that the discussion can be enhanced in Sri Lanka today? We are now looking at, I think, 17 million SIM cards registered in the country. Last count, there are about upwards of 1.2 million people, generally from about 25 to 35 on Facebook. the growth of smartphones in particular year on year. Smartphones in particular are growing, mobile sales are growing. So, I mean, we seem to be a digitally conversant society. Whether we debate and discuss issues like development using digital media is another question altogether. But do you feel that there is a role and relevance of technology to kind of take what only the symposium alone will discuss and debate outwards?
Definitely.
And also actually bringing ideas from out inwards as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Actually, because one of the things that we are trying to say is that the other side of the problem, where development is a problem is when it can't be delivered to people who need it. The other side of that problem is that there are people who are whose needs and wants are going up very rapidly, right? We are thinking about, we never think of limits to consumption. We are always thinking that we can, earn more, consume more, bigger cars, bigger houses, more TVs, more phones, whatever. We don't think of a limit. But this country, this
how
planet,
sustainable that is.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean there is only so much that can, and as you go up and up and up, you take the resources in a certain direction, and those are people who can pay, who can create a demand. So the technologically advanced are also in that category, and I think the conversation about should we be thinking about limits to our consumption, should we be thinking about us in the context of the planet, the society, the community, that is something that really needs to go out there. And certainly through technology, through Facebook, Twitter, I mean, we are trying to encourage this conversation among young people and also among a more urbanized set of people, because that is where a lot of the high consumption is happening. This idea that maybe we need to think about limits for ourselves, because there is no, if you go on and on, there is no end. And if you think, now there was a conversation somebody was saying, if you take the OECD level of consumption and you think of the rest of the world as here, to bring everybody up to this level, we would run out of resources in this planet within 20 years. So, how do you do that? Right? So you have to, I think those are personal issues also.
They are, I mean, we're running out of time, but to the if you say the good life, to off the cuff somebody in the north and east, 27 years of absolute hell, right? Are we denying them their idea of the good life in what they would see through satellite television by the argument that you just made? Or is it about reorienting societal aspirations and the idea of growth as well?
I mean, I think it would be wrong to think that material prosperity is not required, right? I think some level of material prosperity is required, and I think some reasonable level of material prosperity is required. What is not good, and what is happening at a global level also, is that some levels of material consumption is going beyond the scale of what can be considered useful or relevant
or even ethical,
needed.
I would imagine.
Ethical, exactly. And I think that is what is needed to be, that is the conversation we need to have, not at the level of, should you buy a car or should you not buy a car, because I think, some level of material prosperity is, I think it's everybody's, I mean, you can't really tell people, no, you can't have it because, now that's the same thing as developed countries telling us, you can't be developed to this level because, there's no resources to support that. I think we would not agree to that on a country level, and I don't think people would agree to that on an individual level. But I think what is required is a rethinking about what do we want to have, what is the society we want to have, because there are choices to be made.
And how do we get there?
And because these are choices, they're all choices. Because if you want one thing to an extreme, you will give up. You have to give up other things, and whether we are okay with it. And I don't think we have solutions, but I think that conversation needs to happen.
The symposium is on the 11th and 12th of December, I take
11th and 12th of December. So
details on your website?
Details are on the website, yes.
In Sinhala and Tamil as well?
Yes, I think it will come up in Tamil, I think in the next couple of days, yes.
Fantastic. So I hope that the audience listening in will actually partake in those discussions, if not in person, certainly through the output and also through the ongoing live updates during the 2 days of the symposium.
We've got together a really interesting crowd of people from abroad, from international thinkers as well as Sri Lankan people, and I think it will be a very interesting exchange of ideas. So I think the more people come to it and
participate,
yes.
the better. Thanks, Nilakshi, for joining us. A huge topic. I mean, we can't do it any justice in 24 minutes, but thank you as a kind of an entree into both the symposium and I think the large issues of development facing Sri Lanka today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.